Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be speaking with Judit Price, and let's just get right into it. Also, I want to let you know that you can chat in questions at any time on YouTube. So let's get right into the questions. Judit, please tell us your date of birth.
It's 1944. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear
yes.
me? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
It's March 1st, 1944.
And where were you born?
I was born in Budapest, Hungary.
Tell us about your family, your father, your mother, your siblings.
Okay, I'm an only child, so I have no siblings. My father was had a business in Budapest until till the Nazis came in, and he was he had to flee, and actually he was caught and he was put into a slave labor camp, and then they wanted to ship him to Auschwitz, and he was on the train on his way, and then he jumped off the train and hid in a Hungarian farmer's property for about a month till another farmer, neighboring farmer, figured it out what was going on and reported to the authorities. And then they captured him, and but it was too late for it. It was already, the Russians were already on the border, the Soviet Union's on the border, so it was kind of late to go send him back to Auschwitz. So they sent him to a Hungarian slave labor camp where they were building train tracks and tunnels where the Germans could flee from the Russians. So that's where he was when I was born. So he hasn't seen me till I was about, I don't know, 2 months old or something. My mother was born in, actually my mother was born in Budapest, but her parents were Austro-Hungarians. Her father died in the First World War as a captain of the Hungarian-Austrian Habsburg army, and my mother's mother, who was a second runner-up in the Hungarian beauty contest, and she was a widow, very young, and she married this very wealthy Hungarian capitalist man who owned several liquor factories, and he was producing and manufacturing and managing this factory where they were producing liquors, whiskey, vodka, whatever, you name it. My mother grew up in Vienna, where my grandparents had a home, and it was a very upper class family, and my grandmother had lived in a very plush surroundings, and they were very wealthy, and owned apartment buildings in Vienna and Budapest. So my mother grew up with governesses and nannies and all that. So when she met my father, she was actually working as an office manager in a Hungarian company. So they got married in 42, and I was born in 44. My father comes from a small town in near the Czechoslovakian, today the Czech Republic border, called Nyíregyház. His parents were shopkeepers. They manufactured coats and suits, men's suits and coats. So they had they had a shop, a store where they were, you know, selling men's furnishings till their deaths. And then then my father moved to Budapest from Nyíregyháza. He worked for them, with them, and he moved to Budapest and he opened up his business with his brother. So that was in 1944 till the Germans took it away from him. He wasn't allowed Jews weren't allowed to have a business. So that's the time when, during the war, when I was a baby. My mother was when I was born in a hospital, but my mother was it was in March, so my mother actually hid in a basement of our apartment building, which my grandparents owned the building, and my parents had an apartment there. And my mother was in the basement, the cellar, with me for several months till, and I would have died if she couldn't have nursed me. So she always said that I survived because she had enough milk to feed me. So she was in the cellar with me till Raoul Wallenberg came in, who was a Swedish diplomat, and his purpose was to save Jews in Budapest. So by the time he got there was 44. There was 100,000 Jews in Hungary. 50. He saved 45 to 50,000 Jews, and 50,000 perished in the Holocaust, mostly from the countryside. The Jews in Budapest survived longer, and they had a better situation than the Jews in the small villages and the smaller cities. So he basically saved 45,000 Budapest Jews, and I'm one of them. Through my mother, who was in a Swedish Red Cross protected home, with Raoul Wallenberg, who was a Swedish diplomat, and he bought up these apartment buildings in Budapest, and he placed women with children, pregnant women, and young women with young children and babies to live there, and he was able to. And then he gave people a certificate which called Schutzpass, and that just claimed that they had some Swedish protection, and they weren't supposed to be touched by the Gestapo, the Nazis. And that worked for a while till it didn't work, till Eichmann came in, and then he tried to put an end to it. But that was kind of late, so in a war, and the Soviets were on the border, so he really couldn't do. He did some damage in the Budapest Jewry, but basically not as much as he could have if he had been in Budapest earlier. This answers your question?
Sure. What was it like in the Wallenberg house?
I don't know. I don't have any recollection. I was an infant.
Okay.
I only have second-hand information or third-hand. My parents never talked about the Holocaust because it was very painful for them. And I never really asked many questions for, I don't know why, but for some reason, I know it was painful, and I didn't want to stir up bad memories. My grandmother was shot my mother's mother was shot into the Danube. I think it was in November, in November of 44, because I think I was a few months old. She did meet me, and she knew me, but she was rounded up, and several Jews were rounded up, and they brought to the embankment of the river, the Danube River. So what happened is um, they rounded up the people, and one by one they shot them in a freezing cold winter day into the waters, and naturally, of course, they died. But I don't know if any of you ever been to Budapest or plan to visit. There is one of the the steps. There are several pairs of shoes, and one of the shoes was my grandmother's. Because that's how, that's how they did it. They killed them. So anyways,
Did your parents ever have to wear the Star of David?
yeah, they did. They did wear it in toward the end again in '44 when things got escalated and got worse. Yeah, they did wear the Star of David.
Let's talk about your father again. He was put on a train to Auschwitz, and then tell us that story again.
I mean, he was put on a train to Auschwitz. I think I was maybe 2 or 3 months old, and he saw an opportunity to jump off the train, and he did. And he was hiding in the forest for a while till he came upon this farmer's house, cottage, and this farmer took him in, and he let him live in the, I don't know if he lived in the barn or lived in his house, I'm not quite sure. But he stayed with him for a while till somebody in the neighborhood, another farmer, found out what was going on, and he denounced him. So, and then my father was put into a slave labor camp, which was for the purpose of digging tunnels and roads to build for the Nazis to escape, because they knew the Russians were going to be coming, or the Americans. The Allies would come and they have to escape at some point. So, so that's where my father worked, and they put him there to work.
Okay. So he was at the slave labor camp until the Russian liberation came,
right,
in
the
1945.
liberation, which was for 1945, correct, April.
So how many relatives were killed during the Holocaust?
Oh, my mother had a huge family in one of the smaller towns from her father's side, not from her mother's side. Her mother was an only child too, so her mother's side wasn't many relatives. But my mother's father's side was a huge family in a town called Szeged in Hungary. And I don't know, there's about, my mother's father had like 9 brothers and sisters. So there's cousins and aunts and uncles. A lot, every one of them were killed. Every one of them were deported to Auschwitz, but nobody survived.
Wow. Okay. How did your parents feel about the Soviets?
Oh, they hated them. They were horrible. They were maybe a grade better than the Germans, but not much. They raped women, they stole, they broke into homes, and they took whatever they could. My mother, I remember, she was a young woman, so she said she put flour in her hair and put like a kerchief, like a babushka, to be left alone by the Russians because she's afraid she's going to be raped or murdered by them. The Russians were terrible. They treated women terribly, and they weren't the heroes that they made them out to be, or they made themselves out to be.
What was it like to go from?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was it like to go from life under the Nazis to life under communism, under Stalin?
Okay, right. Well, my father was very fortunate because he and his brother teamed up, and they opened up a business in downtown Budapest, one of the biggest thoroughfares and the most commercially frequented by people in the city and also visitors. And they had a storefront and they had a store where um, they were capitalists. They were not. So it was forbidden to be a shopkeeper, to have a store. So what my father did is they had a back room where was a sewing machine and an iron and a couple of coats hanging. One was half done. So if the communists would come in, he could show, you see, this is my workroom, and I making the coats by myself because they weren't allowed to hire people. And in real time, well, he had like 20, 25 people working for him in their homes. So I remember as a little girl going with him in a cab in the morning and collecting the coats, what these tailors made, and then bring it to the store and hang it up and you know, so my father could say that, you see, I made this coat. So he never had more than maybe 20 coats in the store and was by appointment only. So when people came to pick up the coats, it was there, but he never had a lot of inventory because he had to say that he was the tailor and he was not. He was the capitalist, the entrepreneur.
Okay.
And his brother the same way.
Um,
Till they took it away, till they nationalized the business when I was about 16, I think, 16, 17. They finally realized it and what's going on, and they took it away from him. And actually, they threw my uncle to jail. They didn't throw my father because it was under my uncle's name. And he would just kept him for a week and then they let him go. But still, he was in jail because he had a business.
okay. Tell me about the food scarcity or bread lines.
Okay, the food scare, you mean during the Holocaust, you know, or afterwards?
Both.
Okay,
How was it
so,
like before and after? How about
well,
that?
like I said before, the Jews in Budapest had a much easier time because the regent Horthy, Miklos Horthy, was kind of protecting them. He had some kind of contract or something with the Germans that were in return for something he did. So he was able to protect the Jewish population in Budapest. So there was plenty of food. That was not a problem till, of course, toward the end when my mother had to hide in the cellar and the Swedish, that time food was scarce and people were starving. And after the war, there were ration cards, and there wasn't much food, but they managed. I happened to grow up with a silver spoon, if you will, in my mouth because my father had a business and he made good money, and my mother was able to buy good food and nourishing food, and my mother had a live-in help, and so I did grow up fortunately very well till I was 16. Then things have changed drastically. But till I was that age, it was my schoolmates all envied me, and they was, I was very fortunate actually.
Yeah, so your
So there was
story.
the food was scarce again during the revolution in '56. There were bread lines, and I remember my parents were standing in a bread line. And I was young, I was only like 12 years old, so naturally I didn't stand in the bread line, but I would stand with them, and the Russians were shooting around us. I remember that. But after the revolution was over, my father went back to his business, continued, and things were good for another 5, 6 years.
Okay. When did you leave communist Hungary?
I left in 65 and I went to Germany with my mother. My parents got reparation money from the Germans. Um, so my father went ahead of us. My parents had a very lovely apartment on Budapest on the banks of the Danube. This was my grandparents' building, and it was a very big apartment with high ceilings, and was really a beautiful place. And my parents left everything there. And I think we had a feeling that one of the Communist Party members wanted that apartment. So they allowed my father to get a passport and leave because families couldn't live together. They couldn't live Hungary together. So my father left. And then a couple months later, my mother and I left. Of course, there was no internet or, computers to check when people come and go. So my father never came back and they didn't know that. So we had a passport because they thought that my father would be back by then. And my mother and I left and we all went to Düsseldorf, Germany. We were emigrated. My parents left everything, their Oriental rocks, their sterling silvers, their beautiful furniture, everything. China, everything. And left. And the reason they actually left because my father, after my father's business was taken away, he couldn't get a job. He was already 60, I think, and he couldn't get a job. So he worked on the black market, and he smuggled money out, his friends and his own, to Switzerland. And he did that for a couple of years. And again, he was afraid that he was going to get caught. So he ended up leaving, saying that he's going on vacation. And that time they allowed people to go on abroad, as long as not the whole family, just him by himself. So he got this passport. He went to Düsseldorf. He had some money because he smuggled it out through the black market. So he wasn't penniless. And that's how we lived till my parents got the reparation from the Germans.
How old were you when you left?
21.
21?
I was 21.
Okay.
I wasn't permitted to go to university because I was Jewish. So I went to evening school, university at the evening adult education. This what would be called here adult education. There it's called, I don't know what, the evening school. Because I wasn't the only one whose parents were not communists. So I went to school at night, college, and I worked during the day at the Indonesian embassy. I spoke, I think, about 4 or 5 languages. And so I was an interpreter, a translator. I had a very good job and I was paid very well. I made more money than my parents did. And they did that. And at age 20, when I was 21, my father decided that he has to leave because they cut off him smuggling money to Switzerland. So like I said, he left, and my mother and I left. And 5 days after I was out of Hungary, in Düsseldorf, I met my husband. And 4 weeks we were engaged, and 6 months we were married.
That's amazing.
So
when you arrived in Germany, tell me about that. What you remember?
Well, I was
when your
21,
family arrived.
so I remember I was 21 years old. Of course, I remember. I lived first. Our parents lived separately because it was very difficult to get an apartment, to rent an apartment those days in Germany, to Düsseldorf. So then after a while, we found an apartment. So the 3 of us lived again together. But shortly after that, I got married. I moved with my husband to Stuttgart, where he was in the army intelligence, and so he wasn't wearing a uniform when I met him. He was wearing civilian clothes. Only after we married, they took it away from his job and gave him a military job, so he had to wear a uniform. So, but that wasn't long because he was getting out of the army. It was still at the end of his time, and he got out of the. We got married in December, and he was done with the army by June or July, something like that. So it was only for 6 months, and that's the reason I didn't send him to Vietnam, because was already he didn't have enough time. He volunteered, he enlisted, he wasn't drafted. So the reason he would have been shipped to Vietnam, but he was getting off. He only had like 6 months left from his tenure, so they let him leave, and he wasn't sent overseas.
Tell us about your children and your grandchildren, your family.
Okay, I have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. My oldest son is 52, 53, 53, 53. He's a chemical engineer who started his own pharmaceutical company, which he sold a couple years ago. And he became extremely wealthy. And he lives in Massachusetts on the water, and also outside of Savannah. And I have a middle son. He has one daughter, my granddaughter, who's 24 years old. And I have a middle son who is 50, and he used to live in New York till he moved to, because of family obligations from his wife's side, he moved to Michigan. His wife is from Michigan, so they live there. He's in the energy space, and he has 2 little girls, 3 and 6 years old. Actually, I'm very excited with they coming this afternoon at 6 o'clock, landing in Fort Myers. So it's a very big day for me. I haven't seen them since last December. Adorable, lovely 2 little girls, my love of my life. And I have a daughter who is 42. She's my baby. She's the youngest, and she's a Broadway producer, extremely famous in New York. She's very well known. She won 3 Tony Awards. She's up for the 4th one. She just got a Grammy a couple days ago on the Grammy Award. She won a Grammy. She is delight. She's a wonderful, wonderful woman. She's coming from Mother's Day. Adore her. She's a great, great daughter. She doesn't have any children. She's divorced. She works constantly. It's a pretty Broadway. Of course, right now it's no Broadway shows, but they preparing and they doing other things. They doing a lot of stuff for Netflix and movies and streaming and a lot of different things to supplement Broadway till it comes back.
That's amazing.
And I have a 24-year-old granddaughter who lives in New York, and she just getting her master's this spring in business and fashion merchandising, getting a graduate degree.
Well, that's wonderful. So would you remind me again, what year did you come to America?
66.
66. What did you do when you came to America?
Okay. I was pregnant very quickly. On my first anniversary, I got pregnant, must have been on my honeymoon. It was on my first anniversary, I was already pregnant. So I had my oldest son very early. So my husband was working for Gillette company, and then later on he worked for Digital Corporation. He had a big job in high tech. And so I was home for several years, and I had another son. So I was home being a mom. And then when my middle son was in kindergarten, I decided to go back to school and get my degree. And I ended up getting another bachelor degree because I did get one in Budapest also. I never had the diploma because we left before I was able to collect it. So I went back and I got a bachelor degree here in the United States. And my degree was in social work, psychology and social work. And I worked in a women's alcohol center where I was working with drug and alcohol abusing women. And then I did that for a while, and then I realized it was too stressful, and I wanted to. And then I went back and got a master's degree in counseling, and then I started to work in a college, and I was teaching and being a counselor in a counseling office, and then I realized I want to have my own business, and I went back and got another master's degree and started my own company. And I had a company for 35 years, a career management company, like similar to HR. I worked with people I was an executive coach. I worked with executives who were laid off during the downsizing was always downsizing in Boston, so Massachusetts. So that was, I went through a lot of periods when I had contracts with big companies when I was doing the outplacement support for them, and I tried to place executives in different positions. So I wasn't a recruiter. I didn't do recruiting. I strictly did the managing of the careers of these people. And I also worked with college students who didn't know what college to go to and what to study. So I worked with them on career management and career assessment. And I did it for 35 years. I loved it. It was a wonderful career. And I miss it sometimes, and sometimes I'm happy I'm not doing it anymore. But it was great.
Good. Do you think your experience in Budapest under the Nazis and Wallenberg guided your choice of profession?
Well, I think I mentioned before, I was a baby during the Nazis and Wallenberg. So I have no recollection of anything from Wallenberg and the Nazis. I have recollection of the communists. And my major was always languages. So I wanted to work for the UN as an interpreter. That's what I was planning on doing. And then it didn't work out because I got pregnant very early, and I couldn't work. I mean, those days women didn't work unless they had to. So, and I had nobody to watch my children. I had no family here. So I gave up the dream to work for the UN. And of course, my language skills is kind of became very rusty because I don't speak them anymore. But I think my profession came from the fact that I love to go to school, I love to learn, I love to study. So I enjoyed taking classes for, I don't know, I was in school for like 20 years. And I like psychology and sociology. Those are my history. Those were my favorite subjects. So I guess I just by default I fall into that, and I like people. I always like to help and educate and train people. So I guess it just kind of happened. Serendipity.
What message do you want the participants or the students to know about your experiences?
Okay, well, first of all, never give up, no matter what. If you put your mind to something, just pursue it. If hard work and initiative and being tenacious and persistent, it will help and will get you toward your goal. Don't hate anybody. Hate is a terrible, terrible thing, as we all know how horrible all these murders happening in this country. Try to look at the good side of everyone, because everybody has the good side, and try to forgive. You know, if somebody hurt you, I understand to feel terrible, but try not to hate anyone because of their skin color or their eye color or their language or their religion or their values or culture. We all the same. We all humans. Don't ever stop learning. Always try to. I'm still learning. I am taking lots of OSHA classes and different classes on Zoom and WCA, but I believe